Welcome in, everybody. Normal Monday live stream, but not a normal face joining us this evening. Everybody, I have the pleasure of being joined by Josh Callaway, now of 24/7 Sports, handling all of your Oklahoma recruiting news, football news, you name it. He's got you covered. Josh, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Let everybody know a little bit about yourself. Let everybody know what to expect now with you at 24/7 Sports, because I mean it's just been awesome since you got on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on. Going to be a lot of fun. I appreciate the offer, and I'm excited for what we have coming up here. But yeah, no, it's for me, 24/7 Sports. I'm just moving into like my second week here, so very fresh. You're catching me right at the beginning, but so far so good. And we have a really good team over there, and it's exciting times. I covered Oklahoma previously. I was with Sports Illustrated before, covered them the last couple seasons there, so I've been around the team and whatnot, but to get to shift over to 24/7 has been really awesome so far. And we're still in the just early stage of kind of getting everything geared up, but so far so good. And hopefully people will come hang out with us and subscribe and all that good stuff. Because obviously once the season rolls around, especially, we're going to have things cooking, and it's going to be, I think, a really fun year in Norman. So hopefully people can come find us and hang out with us during the season.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. And especially, man, not only the guys y'all have at the 24/7 with Oklahoma now, it's going to be fantastic content. But, we were talking in the green room before 24/7 Sports themselves. That's just like a staple in sports,
Sure.
college football. So it's awesome having you spend some time here with us this evening. I mean, and for people in the chat, Josh and I actually met each other about a year ago at a 7-on-7 event where we were watching, and everybody in chat will know I refer to when I got to watch Jonte Cook and all of them. Well, that was with Josh. We all got to watch that. So
Yeah, I
that was
was
our
mainly
first.
there. I remember I was mainly there to see two guys, By Joe and Ashton Cozart.
Yeah.
Neither one of those guys ended up being Sooners. Cozart was a commit at the time, but yeah, kind of funny to think how quickly stuff changes.
Actually, matter of fact, now that you mentioned Cozart, you and I actually went up to talk to him. You talked to him first, then I talked to him afterwards,
Yeah,
was kind of
I
talking to him
remember that.
about Oklahoma.
Right.
Ironically enough, I don't know if you remember, you and I sat there. It was you, I, Marcus with Sharp Sports, and we were watching Kevin Sperry spin the ball, and we were all just like, "Yo, who's this kid?"
Right.
Because he looked different. He was a sophomore at the time, I think, or a freshman, and he was just
Yeah, it was
different.
last spring, so yeah.
Man, there's a lot for us to talk about. You're 100% right. There's a lot of excitement going on in Norman. Before we really turn our attention to the future totally, now that we have you here, I kind of want to get your thoughts on some of the things we've seen in the past, and specifically OU
Mm,
post spring, right? There's a lot of moving pieces in Norman, right? There's a lot that's the same, but Brent Venables' defense, this is not an easy defense to come in and master. And I wasn't surprised to see the defense continue making strides throughout the season. In fact, I thought that was natural. Watching the
yeah.
spring game, having access to some of the practices, and I realize, you know, even though that a lot has changed and a lot still is going to change, what stood out to you that you think is different, or what stood out to you in the spring game that has you really fired up?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to imagine that Oklahoma defensively is going to be a lot better. And, you try to, simmer down a little bit, not get too a little overhead of your skis on that kind of thing. But just the talent is noticeably improved, and the depth is noticeably improved. Really, on a lot of areas on the team, but especially on that defensive side, because that was not what anybody was expecting last year, quite frankly. And a lot of us got caught, a little embarrassed, frankly, because the drop off that we were expecting from last year under Lincoln to Venables last year was a lot bigger than what we had thought. But when you look back at it, it's not that crazy in hindsight. Now you look at the talent they've added. They've done an amazing job in the transfer portal, adding not just guys who will play, in rotational pieces, but impact starter level players on the defense. Deshaun McCullough, of course, big obvious one of the top transfers, period. He's going to be a starting linebacker, starting defensive ends from Wake Forest, Rondell Bothroyd, Trace Ford from Oklahoma State, Reggie Pierce from Texas Tech. He's got a very good chance to be one of those starting safeties. And you look at where they've got these guys from, they're from other Power 5 programs, and they're coming in ready to make a big impact and play a lot of snaps. So just overall, it was apparent in practice, and then it was apparent in the spring game that defensively, the talent and the depth has been, significantly upgraded, which I think is what OU fans want to hear the most of anything. Now, how that translates on the field, you assume it's going to be a lot better, but I think just last year was so stunningly poor. It was worse than the previous year in almost every statistic. They went down from the last year under Alex Grinch with Lincoln Riley, which nobody thought that was going to be the case. Because of that, you kind of come in a little cautious here, but on paper, it's really come a long way pretty quickly. And this defensive staff that Brent has put together is really impressive. So, yeah, in the spring game, I mean, the first 6 or 7 possessions, Dylan Gabriel, Jackson Arnold, it didn't matter. The offense couldn't move the ball. OU defense was dominating the first part of that game. They had to adjust the scoring system because it was an offense versus defense spring game, and the defense got points for like tackles for loss and stuff. After the first quarter, the defense was up by 40 points or whatever it was. They had to adjust the scoring system on the fly because the defense was going to win by 200 points. I mean, the defense was dominating. So there's a lot to like, frankly, just with the talent upgrades. That was the main thing you're watching. I think offensively, mostly you kind of know what to expect. It'll probably be pretty similar to last year. When Dylan Gabriel was healthy last year, the offense was pretty effective. Had its moments that got a little bogged down at times. Sometimes that really quick Jeff Lovie offense got them in trouble. But for the most part, the offense was largely okay. It was fine last year. Should be more of the same, but defensively should be a whole lot better. It's hard not to feel that way after being around that team all spring and the spring game. And like you said, some practices and stuff like that. Thankfully, Venables is pretty open in that area. So he lets us come out and see the guys in pads and whatnot. And it's hard not to be impressed with what they've added. And there's a lot to be excited about.
Yeah, no, and I know that access has got to be fantastic, not only for you, but for
big
the
difference.
fans.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
big difference from the previous. It's a big jump because Lincoln is notoriously pretty shut off. Doesn't really let you come to practice. If he does, it's for like 10 minutes and guys are just stretching. You don't see anything. He kind of doesn't let a whole lot of players, lets like a very select few group of players talk to media. Notoriously never let freshmen. That included Caleb Williams, even though he was the starting quarterback. We never got to talk to him. And Brent is almost the total opposite in that regard. So you do feel like you have a much better kind of finger on the pulse of the team because of that. So we're very appreciative of that.
Yeah, and you talked about the staff Brent brought, and that whenever he was hired is immediately what stood out to me. I mean, we can talk about Brent Venables, we can talk about who he's learned under, the accolades he's had, the defenses he's architected, and we can have an hour-long podcast just on those subjects right there. But it gets even more intriguing when I look and I see, okay, well, he has Todd Bates. I look, okay, well, Jay Valai has a ton of roots to the state of Texas. He's got a ton of roots now to the SEC. Brandon Hall has been on fire on the recruiting trail. There's so many coaches, and that's not to speak of being able to retain a Bill Bedenbaugh, who I don't even need to talk about what he's done in terms of development. But when I watched this spring game, one thing that stood out to me, and granted it is a spring game, but it was notable to me. When I go back and watch those Brent Venables defenses with Clemson, those defenses played fast and with confidence. And I think whenever we saw Oklahoma's defense playing fast and with confidence, they were able to get some things done. But naturally, whenever you don't have a year to learn a defensive scheme that's so complex, and you're coming from a defensive scheme in Alex Grinch's that is less complex because it's about simplicity and speed as opposed to just scheme, right? I mean, beautiful scheme with Venables. Watching that spring game, the confidence looked like it was there. The aggression looked like it was there. Everything looked to be happening a step quicker. And in my mind, I was like, look, it's a spring game. But that's exactly what you needed to see, especially at that linebacker position. There's a lot of depth there, man. Talk to me about the linebackers because I am really excited for what the Sooners could field there.
Yeah, no, and that's Brent's position. He's a linebacker coach, at heart. When you go out to practice and they break out into their indies, their individual, stations with all the position coaches, Brent Venables is with the linebackers. That's where he goes. And he's got Danny Stutzman right next to him, and he's got Jaron Kanik on the other side, and that's what they do. So that's a spot that you expect to be a lot better. And last year, the three guys were fine for the most part. Danny Stutzman had a pretty good year. Deshaun White had a really quite solid year. And then David Webu kind of hit or miss, and that's why he ended up portaling out. But there was no depth at all. It was those three guys played 90, +% of the snaps. They were out there the whole game, and that bared out at the end of games. You saw guys start to get really sloppy. I think of that West Virginia game, which was in a misty, gross weather. And late in that game, they were missing tackles everywhere. Danny Stutzman got ran over by backup QB there for West Virginia. I mean, a lot of that was just fatigue, and that shouldn't be as much of a problem. I think this year the depth has definitely gotten a lot better. And like you pointed out, Brent Venables' defense is considered very complicated. A lot of players said that last spring, that it was a challenge, and they're still learning it throughout the season. So all these guys back for year 2, just that alone is going to make a big difference. The fact that they're so much further ahead, because another thing you pointed out, which is also very true, Alex Grinch's defense is very well known to be quite simple. It couldn't be a bigger leap on that front for a lot of these guys who are obviously Grinch commits. Now you come in year 2, it's a lot more Venables players, obviously, which is a big thing. But then they're all in their second year of it. Danny Stutzman, Cole McKenzie is a big one. Kip Lewis is a big one. He led the defense in tackles in the spring game, Kip Lewis. And just that alone, those things kind of all combined there is going to make a very big difference. But that defensive, room overall, and the linebacker specifically, Danny Stutzman's the leading the charge. He's the leader of the team in general. Very vocal. Brent Venables loves him. He's going to lead the charge there. Deshaun McCullough, I mentioned a little bit ago. He's going to start almost certainly at that cheetah spot, which is where Deshaun White was last year and had the best year of his career. Deshaun McCullough seems like a perfect fit for that, but he may rush the passer a little bit more than Deshaun White did. And then, like I mentioned, Cole McKenzie, Kip Lewis, Jaron Canick, these are all guys who were freshmen last year going to their second year. All those guys should be able to take a very big leap. I'm a huge fan of Cole McKenzie. That guy is a stud, and he's ready to go. And Kip Lewis, it's hard not to be really impressed by him because, like I said, he led led OU in tackles in the spring game, and he's undersized right now. If he can bulk up, and get to the physical, level of Cole McKenzie or some of these other guys, he's going to be a problem too. So that linebacker room has come a long way in a short period of time. And like I said, that's Brent Venables' baby, that position. So he wants it to get to a more, comfortable place. And I think it's certainly a lot closer to being what he would hope for, based off the additions they made and just these guys kind of taking that leap in year 2.
Especially with Stutzman. I think that's great to hear that
Yeah.
he's really stepped up as a leader of the team because of the importance Venables puts on that linebacker position, not only in the Clemson defense, the Oklahoma defense. We just look across college football. That's your quarterback of the defensive side of the ball. Now you imagine the guy that's already widely considered the quarterback of the defensive side of the ball under Brent Venables, where so much is asked. You talked about the depth, and I love that. One of the things that also stood out to me, because when I was watching that spring game, instantly within the first few minutes, I had 1-10-21 as all numbers I had written down that were just flying off the screen. 10, Kip Lewis, like you said, just flying off the screen. 21, Pearson making a lot of plays. Deshaun McCullough, it was interesting watching him so quickly pick up a position that's really quite difficult. And one of the things we've done here on this show is try and really break down what the cheetah position is, where it's a hybrid position of several different positions, whether we're talking safety, linebacker, and in McCullough's case, that guy has the ability to straight up rush off. He is a physical freak. But I think one of the things that had to excite Sooner fans, seeing McCullough first off pick it up, but then seeing how good Justin Harrington was right there with him, having that depth at a position like cheetah. Talk to me about that as well, because it's not just relegated to the linebacker position, this depth that we're seeing in year 2.
No, not at all. And the secondary in general has also come a long way. You mentioned Jay Valai and Brandon Holt both have done a really good job beefing up those spots, both corner and in the back end, in the last couple of years. I think safety personally is the most deep position on the team, which is nuts because a couple of years ago, it seemed like, the last year in Lincoln, 2021, they were moving guys. They were just moving guys over to corner, just doing anything, just trying anything. Billy Bowman was playing corner a lot of that season. They were trying anything to just try and find some answers. And now you look at this year and the number of options. They've had about 5, 6, maybe even 7. I'd have to go back and look. It's been a lot of guys in the secondary who have portaled out. And they still have a ton of depth there. And all those guys left because they just saw the writing on the wall. Those spots are so jam-packed right now. But yeah, Justin Harrington and Deshaun McCullough, those two guys both being at that cheetah spot, I think kind of speaks to like you're pointing out, the versatility of it in that hybrid spot, because Deshaun McCullough is much more of a prototypical linebacker, where Harrington's more of like a safety, a little bit of a big one, but nevertheless. So the fact that they can kind of play around with the sets and move McCullough around, get Harrington in there, that kind of thing is going to be hugely beneficial, I think, for them. Because Deshaun McCullough, yeah, he's one of those guys. He just is different. His length is absurd, and he's a guy that, if you're a casual college football fan, which is totally fine, and you see that he came from Indiana, you might kind of be like a little bit like, Indiana, how much is a guy from Indiana going to come help OU right away? He's a blue chipper prospect. He went to high school in Bloomington. He stayed home to go to Indiana. He had offers from almost anywhere that he could have went almost anywhere he wanted to in the country, just chose to stay closer to home, had a really productive freshman year with the Hoosiers in the Big Ten, and now he makes a jump over to Oklahoma. And he's a perfect Venables player. He's so mature, and it's funny, all these guys that Brent adds, both coaches and players, when you talk to them, they have this kind of just innate trait that it's hard to really put your finger on what exactly it is, but just the way they talk and their approach to the game and life, frankly, is all really, really similar. Deshaun McCullough fits into that perfectly. Venables loves him, and he's going to be, he feels like has all the makings to be a star in that spot. But yeah, him and Justin Harrington both, because he's had another great spring. Justin Harrington is like the king of practice in spring ball, because he's just physically imposing and he does all these things. And he's had a crazy career where he actually hit the transfer portal and then came back to Oklahoma. Brent Venables let him walk back on to come back onto the team last year. And now he's worked his way back up to being where he is. It's kind of nuts, but there's a lot of depth back there. And that safety room, like I mentioned, is jam-packed. And Justin Harrington kind of fits into that nickel cheetah spot, but it's still point stands there that the secondary in general is got a lot of options, which is a good place to be in.
Yeah, before we dive into the secondary, I did want to talk about this for a bit, because it's a point that I've been talking about, and you can speak to it because with much more legitimacy than I can, because you live it on a daily basis. One of the things I've talked about since Venables was hired by Oklahoma is expect recruiting to look different. And different isn't bad. Different can be very good. I'll never forget whenever I was first really starting to become a degenerate into college football, where it's all I watched, researched, everything. I always remember Alabama and Clemson did something that stood out to me. And I'm sure they're not the only places that do it. They were just very vocal. You might get an offer from them, but if it was an offer to come camp, they want to see you live in person, and then they would build their own top board off of what they saw in front of them. But because of that, whenever I would talk to like my former roommate, he played college football. He had some guys that transferred to his school from Alabama. And he's like, they're all the same. Like, you just kind of know they get a type. And it feels to me like that's one of the reasons why Venables was going to be so successful. And it was one of the reasons why whenever there was maybe a slow start to recruiting, like earlier this year, people were wondering, is this going to be a slow year for OU? I was saying, no, not at all. Venables recruits differently. He's going to take the time, foster the relationships, and then it is going to pop. Do you think that's a fair assessment of the situation?
100%. And, we talked about that a lot, in the last couple of years, of OU fans needing to kind of recalibrate the recruiting calendar for them from what it was before, because Brent puts a very strong emphasis on not committing until you mean it. That's a big thing for him. He wants guys to have completed their visits, preferably before they decide. He doesn't like guys to commit and then still take a bunch of visits. He's adapting a little bit on that. He softened a little. You've seen that last couple of years where he does let guys in kind of certain occasions. But for the most part, he tells guys, do not commit until you've talked with everybody, you've visited everywhere, and you feel good about it. And so because of that, that pushes things back a little bit. And frankly, if you look at back where they were on May 15th of last year, they're really further ahead than they were last year. Last season, and the recruiting cycle for 23, which ended up being a higher class than anything that Lincoln Riley signed, which is nuts. The big part of the year was that late June to early July is where it really started to pop off. And I felt like they were getting a guy every single day. And I envisioned something similar, frankly, for this coming summer. And they have some really impressive players, brought in already, but they're going to continue to add to it. There's several big name guys, both offensively and defensively, that they're chasing right now, saying that they feel like they're in pretty good shape for. And I think a lot of those guys are going to come along over the course of the summer, which is, a lot of what happened last year. I mean, it was around the middle part of June or so. A lot of fans were wondering, like, is this going to pick up? Like, we don't have a full class here. And right around the early part of July, kind of leading up to Big 12 Media Days, it felt like one or two guys a day. Like it started to, when it got going big time. So yeah, totally agree. It's just a different kind of philosophy. And I think OU fans, for the most part, now that they've kind of come around to understanding it, like it, because frankly, the last couple of years under Lincoln, there was kind of an issue of losing guys that were committed for months and months and months, and they would decommit and flip out. And it kind of got people sour in the whole process of like, let me know when he signs kind of a thing. I think you can feel a lot better about guys who commit under Venables because of those policies. So I think so far so good. I mean, he has one full cycle, and like I said, there's a top 5 class, which is something that they didn't do under the previous regime, which is, I think, a lot of people, and nationally, that would have surprised a lot. So can't argue with it so far.
Even taking your point a step further, the last year Coach Riley was with Oklahoma, I was doing some defending for Oklahoma because their class ranked outside the top 10. And I was like, yes, it was a small recruiting class, which is a little bit odd when you look at the national and so many teams are taking 25.
Yeah.
I believe Oklahoma took 16 in Riley's last year, plus the transfer portal. But I pointed everybody to the player average and saying, look, it's a small class, but the quality of guys they're getting is really good. With Brent Venables, it's totally opposite, where they're taking a full class, but that average player rating, it's gone nowhere. It is right where it was with Riley, but now you're seeing 6, 7, 8 more guys in the class. You talked about how Oklahoma was a top 5 recruiting class in the nation. One, that's insane because they just came off of a season where they had their first losing season in. I mean, how many of these recruits out there remember the Oklahoma Sooners having a losing season? Not many.
They weren't born. Most of them, they were not born. It was in the 90s. It was 98. So
exactly. if they were, they're in the portal, right? They're a portal player. The fact that Oklahoma, coming off of that season, gets not only a top 5 recruiting class, but then a top 10 class in transfer portal acquisitions was nuts. But like I started off, to go a little bit further back on your point, whenever Venables got there, Oklahoma had the exodus in their recruiting class and still ended up with a top 10 class in recruiting and a top 10 class in trans. And at that point right there, I just started looking around and saying, how are you going to question him? Like the results on the field we can talk about, but recruiting, this is speaking for itself, guys. This is elite stuff. What was your reaction to seeing that? Because that's not normal. I feel like we've almost normalized it. That wasn't normal.
Yeah, the fact that he came in when he did in December, obviously, and cobbled together the class, because it was an exodus. I mean, Malachi Nelson, all those receivers. I mean, it was all these guys. It was just an avalanche that day. Lincoln left on a Sunday morning, and by Monday afternoon, the next day, OU's recruiting class had taken a massive blow. And Brent came in and he hired Jeff Lebby, and he started to get some of these staffers in, and they did an unprecedented job in keeping guys, getting some guys who decommitted to recommit. That happened with Kobe McKenzie. He went from OU to Texas, and he got him to come back, which is insane. And then, adding talented players, on such short notice, really was incredibly impressive to still get in the top 10 and to still keep some guys. They added Nick Evers. They got a quarterback. Now he obviously has transferred out since then, but Jaden Gibson, a highly touted receiver who's still on the team and hoping to make a bigger impact this year. I mean, they found a way in a really short time to still sign a legitimately obviously a top 10 class, which is it was very impressive, because I think a lot of people thought that was where it was going to hurt the most in such a short time period. How are they going to cobble together this class and keep it respectable? Well, they more than did that. And then, like we said, first time full cycle through top 5 class. And now this 2024 group is starting to round into shape, and they're off to a really good start in 25s as well. They already have a few guys committed there, including Kevin Sperry, who we talked about a second ago. So it is kind of, that was really the one fear, I guess, if you want to call it that, among OU fans whenever he was hired as the head coach. Was that was the guy that every OU fan wanted from the moment Lincoln left. That was the preferred candidate. But the one fear, or I guess concern, other than the obvious that he hadn't been a head coach before, was the recruiting aspect, how much they're going to use the transfer portal, those things. And those things have all, he's passed those tests with flying colors so far in the first, 18 months or so as the head guy.
Yeah, the use of the transfer portal has been masterful. I mean, getting into the caliber of players they have, you look at who they've gotten and the impact they have had, it has been a great usage of the transfer portal. And I think one of the biggest questions I was getting on my channel was people from the Oklahoma fan base would ask me, do you think they'll still have the offensive recruiting? I think there was a belief that defensive recruiting would pick up, which it absolutely has. Well, it didn't take long for Oklahoma to land Jackson Arnold, who dominated everywhere he went. Elite 11, Denton Geyer, you name it, the dude put up huge numbers. You said you got to watch him at Elite 11, and I just heard stories. So the recruiting has been just unbelievable. Now, before we dive into the 2024 recruiting class, we've talked about the defense. You had a great piece and a great video come out here recently talking about whether or not there could be a quarterback controversy at Oklahoma. Now, Dylan Gabriel has the familiarity going back to the UCF days with Jeff Lebby. And one thing we know about Dylan Gabriel, he's a safe option when he's healthy. You know what he's going to give you. He knows the offense. But talk to us about Jackson Arnold. What are you seeing in the background? Because we know he's a special player.
Yeah, Jackson Arnold, certainly has the feel of that transcendent, generational type of player. He really does. And it's hard not to, you try to avoid the recency bias of it, but there's so many parallels and similarities, not even really in their personalities per se, but just the way that players that gravitate toward him, the fans and other high school guys. I mean, talk about how good that class was. You have to give credit where it's due. Jackson Arnold is a big reason why that class was as high as it was. He recruited a lot of that top 5 group we just talked about. A big part of that was Jackson Arnold himself working the phones. He committed in January of last year and never wavered. His recruiting process was zero drama at all. He was rock solid with OU the whole time, and he ended up recruiting all these different guys, including his high school teammate Peyton Bowen, who came right down to signing day. So that class being as high as it was, a big part of that was Jackson Arnold, and you can't help but draw the parallels to Caleb Williams 2 years prior. It was a very, very similar situation in 2020. Caleb Williams comes aboard, and that 2020 group that Lincoln signed, a big part of that was Caleb organizing recruiting camps and official visits as groups and stuff. Him doing that himself as a high school kid, getting all these guys to Norman during dead periods during COVID and whatnot, and he still found a way to make it happen. It feels pretty similar to what Jackson is doing. So even beyond the player, like on the field, which is, I think, obvious. Anybody who's watched him play, Elite 11, like you said, he's got all the chops to be a big time, first round NFL draft pick type of player. I think that's pretty well accepted at this point. But the off the field part of it, other players gravitate toward him. Feels like a star right now before he's even done anything. He's really handles himself well in media and stuff like that. We've gotten the chance to talk to him a few times, and he's always been great. He's very relaxed, but at the same time, kind of understanding, like, he's not coming in with this mindset of like, this is my job, I'm going to go get it. He's coming in with that, I'm willing to wait behind Dylan, but if the opportunity presents itself, he's also confident enough to feel like he's ready to go too. He strikes that balance really, really well. So, like you kind of referenced, I talked about it a little before, the controversy part of it. Dylan Gabriel is going to start in week 1. I would bet everything I own that he'll start in week 1. There's no way that they would do anything differently. But as we've seen over time, Dylan Gabriel is a pretty solid college quarterback. He kind of is what he is at this point. This is like his 5th year of college football, maybe even 6th. I have to, he's played 4 years, but with injuries and whatnot. He's been around a long time, and he's a solid college QB. He is not Heisman caliber, which OU fans have been spoiled by, frankly, the last 5-6 years. And if they start off and they're like last year, they're 3-3 at the midway point or whatever, I think there's a very solid chance that they would make a possible switch up there. And I've seen a lot of fans point out Dylan Gabriel's had some injury problems. If he gets hurt and has to miss a game, he may not get that job back, because that's what Jackson, is potentially. So it's exciting to see it shake out. There's not a battle or anything like that. Like I said, Gabriel will start in week 1. But if there's any funny business at all, injury or poor play, it could get dicey pretty quickly.
And that's exactly what you want. I mean, Nick Saban has talked about this for so long. Iron sharpens iron.
Mm-hmm.
Jackson Arnold is going to be a better football player having competed with Dillon Gabriel, as Dillon Gabriel will be a better football player having Jackson Arnold with him every single day. And I'm not trying to speak about the quarterback situation Oklahoma had last year, but they didn't
Yeah.
have a Jackson Arnold in the event that Dillon Gabriel went down.
There was no backup option. The narrative that Lincoln Riley left the cupboard bare for Oklahoma was a little overstated, but that was not, it wasn't overstated when it came to the quarterbacks, because Lincoln
100%.
Riley notoriously didn't recruit every other year. He skipped a year on his quarterbacks, which was playing with fire, and it never burned him, but it did burn the guys after him with Venables and Jeff Levy, because Caleb Williams transfers out, Spencer Rattler transfers out. There were 0 scholarship quarterbacks left on the team after those 2 guys transferred out. So Oklahoma did the best they could getting Dillon Gabriel in, which was a solid pickup. They got him. He was already committed to UCLA. They flipped him. And then they just scrounged to find anything else they could. They got Davis Beville, who was the 3rd-string quarterback at Pittsburgh. I mean, that's how low. I mean, they were just trying to find bodies, guys who could be a scholarship quarterback. And that left them, once Dillon went down, with no real legitimate backup plan. And that bared out with the Texas game that we all saw what happened there. And obviously, thankfully, Dillon came back right after that, because it would have been more of the same without him. Now Jackson, a actual living, breathing, legitimate backup plan if Dillon does go down. And like we said, he's had injury problems. So you're not hoping for that, but you have to be prepared if it does happen.
Yeah, it's the reality of college football. As
Right.
much as we love this game, it's an amazing game. It's the best game in the world. It's a violent game. And injuries happen every single year. Bear Bryant had a great quote whenever they asked him about winning national championships. He's like, there wasn't a national championship winning coach alive that wasn't extremely lucky, because that's part of football.
Yeah.
Did you sustain the injuries? And one point I will say that I think is good for Jackson Arnold, especially in the situation he's in, where he very well looks to be QB2. His skill set fits what Lebby wants to do like a glove. Like a glove. I mean, it was a great addition. When we were in the green room, we were talking about, I got to see it at Denton Guyer. You got to see it in the spring game. Talk to us about his athleticism, because he's a sneaky athlete now. And I think it's easy to think he's a statue in the pocket. That is not the case.
No, I mean, I would implore people to go look up his rushing statistics at Denton Guyer. He filled it up on the rushing side of things as well. He's dynamic. He can move in the pocket, and Jeff Levy likes to work in that QB run game a little bit. He tried to stay away from it a little bit last year because, like we just said, there was not really any backup plan. But even so, they still would utilize it. And Dillon Gabriel, who's not a real big runner, he can run a little. He had some really good moments last year. He had like an 80-yard touchdown against Nebraska. I mean, he had some moments last year with his feet. And Jackson Arnold is a more dynamic runner than Dillon Gabriel is. So that second element is not talked about a whole lot, because the arm strength, the arm, talent and things like that are obvious. But yeah, Jackson Arnold can definitely fill it up on the rushing side of things as well, which is really exciting. He did it in the spring game. I think it was a 60-something yard touchdown, and ended up getting called back. They said he was touched, and obviously spring games, you get touched, quarterback's down, but it still didn't keep us from all being like, oh man, that's he just looks different. He looks different, so yeah. And that's another thing that's important to note too from the spring game is he was running with the 2s the whole game against the 1 defense. At the end of the game, they put him out there with the 1 offense and right down the field touchdown with a dime pass, to almost win the game. It tied the game, but or set him up to go for 2 for the win, but you get the idea. But yeah, he's a special player. He is. And it's hard to expect any true freshman to step right in and do it. Even Caleb Williams, obviously, he had amazing moments in his true freshman year, but he also had growing pains moments as well. So if Jackson Arnold does get in there, you try to temper expectations a little bit, but he does feel like a star. He does. He has all that excitement surrounding him. So if he gets out there, it'll be exciting to see, because like you said, perfect fit for Jeff Levy's system. What Denton Guyer did, that basically is Jeff Levy's offense. It's almost the exact same. So that should be a very good transition for him. And I think we saw that a little bit in the spring game.
Absolutely. And before we talk about some of the other recruits Oklahoma fans need to be excited about, because we are talking about what they have, there's a whole wave coming in the summer, and there's a few names I really want to highlight. Seth has a great question here for you. And for those that may have came in a little bit later, Seth asks, I might have missed it, where can we watch Josh now? Josh, I'll let you take this.
Sure. Appreciate asking. Oklahoma.247sports.com. is our website, and our YouTube channel, which is just launched. So it's in the very early going. We're racking up subscribers a little bit, but it's in its baby stages. Oklahoma Sooners on 24/7 Sports. That's what our YouTube channel is, and that's where we haven't even had the first episode yet because, like I said, we're on Monday of week 2 for me, but we'll have our podcast, which we'll launch here soon with Colin Kennedy and James Jackson. That'll be launching here in the next week or two. So catch us all there. That's where we'll be living.
Absolutely. And I'll be sure to link this whenever we get done going live. I'll have a link for everybody. That way you guys can go and find it if you come back to this later. But they're going to have tremendous content. You do not want to miss it. A great team is going to be covering all of your needs. And speaking of covering some of the needs, man, summer enrollees. Now,
Yeah.
I've had this question, and Oklahoma fans have pushed back, and I understand. My biggest question with Oklahoma's offense right now, and I say question for lack of a better word. Question, just like we talked about earlier, is one of those words with a negative connotation. Typically, when people say, "Oh, I question this," they mean it as almost a backhanded compliment.
Sure.
When I say I question this, I'm curious, right? I like to think of myself as a nerd, the scientific method. I want to see it played out. So my biggest question for Oklahoma's offense, what's that wide receiver room going to do? Oklahoma loses above 50% of receptions and above 60% in production. I love Jaleel Farouk. Jeff Lebby showed us he is going to move him around and just cause havoc for opposing defenses. Drake Stoops is a really solid wide receiver, but this Lebby offense is predicated a lot on the wide receiver usage. Talk to us about the wide receiver room, because there's a guy coming in the summer that I am very excited to see make his college football debut.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair assessment with the wide receiver room. It is the biggest question on the team right now. You're replacing your number one guy for the last 3 years with Marvin Mims. He was a 1,000-yard receiver last year. He was your bona fide, no questions about it, number one guy for 3 seasons. So anytime you're in that boat, there's going to be some question marks there. And I think Jaleel Farouk is supposed to be that guy, going to slide into that role. I actually asked Marvin about it at Pro Day. Jaleel stepping into that number one role. He basically is like, look, that guy is a freak of nature. You guys have seen that. He can run the ball. He did some wildcat quarterback type of stuff last year at times. He is a different type of dude. But it's a different story when you are the number one and the other defenses are game planning around you. Doesn't have Marvin Mims on the other side to draw attention, things like that. I'm a believer in Farouk, but, you have to see it. That's where the question part comes in. Drake Stoops as well. You know what you're going to get with him. He's Drake Stoops. He's solid. He's consistent. One of the most reliable guys on the team. You know what he is. And they have guys after those two. Obviously, they've been very aggressive at this position in the transfer portal. They had Angelo Anthony from Michigan, who is known as a burner. Lots of speed. His career highlight, I think he had like 90+ yard touchdown reception against Michigan State when he was a freshman. A lot of speed there. A lot to like. Hasn't done a whole lot yet, but he's been with Michigan the last 2 years, so he's been at a blue blood college football playoff team the last couple of years. So he kind of knows what it looks like. They had a Brennan Thompson from Texas, which is like another guy who's got big time speed. They're going to be leaning on him. And then there's some of these other guys who are going into their second year in Norman, a couple of transfers. LV Bunkley Shelton was at Arizona State. He was at OU last year, didn't have that big of a role. How does he make a jump in the second year? I know he's hoping to. Same goes for JJ Hester, comes from Missouri. He was hurt pretty much all of last year, so we didn't really see him at all. His second year in the program, I know he's expected and hoping, to make a big step. And then a couple of freshmen who are going to be sophomores next year, Jaden Gibson and Nick Anderson, both guys who are physical specimens. They stand out in practice, their height, their length, wingspan, things like that. Both those guys are hoping to step up and be into a bigger role in the second year. Also, real quick too, I am guilty of forgetting about him sometimes, is DJ Graham, who was a cornerback, moves over to wide receiver. I have no idea, honestly. He's like an enigma. He's a mystery and how that's going to work out. What I do know about DJ Graham is that he's one of the smartest guys on the team. He's incredibly hardworking. We know he has hands. We've seen him. Everybody saw that Nebraska interception. We know he has hands. And he has said, he was honest and open with us that he always wanted to play offense. That's his love, his passion, his offense. He went to defense because that was the need they had at the time. And as time went on, he thought that he could make the move, and he just had to do it. You know what I mean? So he made the switch. So I don't know it's hard to say what he's going to be, but like I said, I know all those things about him. And then as far as summer guys, I assume you're referring to Jacquez Petaway, who is lightning fast. I mean, Texas, 6A track meet level speed. And Keon Brown's another one, too, to keep an eye on as well as a true freshman receiver coming in. Both those guys have the ability to maybe work in the fold, but obviously, especially Petaway. So this receiver room is a question mark, but they have the guys. The guys are there. I just rattled off like 10 realistic options. So the guys are there, but none of these guys outside of Jalil Farouk a little bit and obviously Drake Stoops a little bit have really done it at this level. So that's where the question comes in. They haven't done it yet. Doesn't mean they can't do it. Far from it. They just haven't done it yet. So it's on one or two of these guys to step up and have the biggest year of their life. That's what OU needs. And if that doesn't happen, then there might be problems. But odds are at least one or two of these guys are going to step up and rise to the occasion. It's just a matter of who.
And you've exemplified why I have a question, right? I can talk about what was
right.
lost, but then it's when we start pointing to what Oklahoma has and you realize there's talent in the room, but there are so many different possible scenarios. It's hard to put your thumb down and say, this is the one. This is the one that I think is most likely. Now, speaking of Petaway, the reason why I'm so excited for him is because and I could be wrong here, he's probably going to be out the slot. Oklahoma has got a lot in terms of what they're doing on the outside. I think Farouk has the ability to be moved everywhere, but Anthony will probably be an outside guy. You have Anderson and Gibson that could eat up on the outside. Petaway in the slot could be a demon with the speed he possesses. He's lightning in a bottle. So is there a lot of excitement moving forward into some of these other guys? And I know Keon Brown, he was someone who I thought was probably a little bit underrated in the high school rankings, but once again, he's probably going to be an outside guy. And that seems to be where OU has a lot of depth. If you had to pick a name right now that you thought is going to cement themselves in that receiver room, who would it be?
Outside of Jalil Farouk or including
outside of you can include Farouk for sure.
Farouk he's going to be asked to be that number one, and it's going to be a matter of if he's ready for it or not. I tend to think he is. I think he is an absolute stud. It's also important, and I have to make sure I point out Cheez-It Bowl against Florida State. He was really good. Now Marvin Mims did play in that game, but Jalil Farouk, he feels like he's ready to go in terms of being that number one guy. But as far as who I expect to step up, I really like Angelo Anthony. I do like him a lot from Michigan. Just getting to talk to him in spring camp. He's another one of these guys. It's true of like almost everybody that Venables and his staff have brought in the last year and a half. Really mature, well-spoken. He knows what he needs to do to get where he needs to be. Loves the offense, getting that rapport with Dylan Gabriel. It's just there's a lot to like there. And a lot of these guys, I could see it. But I do believe in Angelo Anthony and that speed that he has. And we've seen him do it in flashes at Michigan. But I think coming to Oklahoma with obviously more of an offensive system that's probably suited to him, I really think that he is the prime candidate, if you made me power rank him, to be that rise up and take on a big role. Because obviously you're losing Marvin Mims, you're also losing Theo Weiss. So there's openings here in terms of somebody stepping up. And I think Angelo Anthony would be my favorite right now to kind of join Farouk and Stoops as kind of the three-headed monster. But it could be, there could be a few of these other guys. And I hate to hedge, but it could be. But I would favor Anthony.
That's once again the good problem you run into when you start talking about the Oklahoma Sooners wide receiver room. It's hard to pick who. And of course, we'd be remiss if we talked Oklahoma wide receiver room and didn't mention the new coach in the room, Emmett Jones, someone who has been on fire in the recruiting trail. Talk to me about Emmett Jones, what Oklahoma fans need to be fired up about that he now finds himself a member of the Sooners staff.
Yeah, Emmett Jones is off to a great start. Yeah, he's been on a heater on the receiving side, on the recruiting side of things, and probably more to come as they're in the market for some of these other guys that they're chasing right now as well. But the main thing with Emmett Jones, and he knows football and everything like that. But the two things that OU fans are going to love about him, first, that he has a reverence for Oklahoma. When he was first hired and we got a chance to talk to him, he basically just explained how OU was one of the schools that he always wanted to work for. And it was always if I get an offer, and almost no matter what else I'm doing, I'm going to drop everything. I'm going to do it. So he really appreciates where he is. That's not going to be a problem with Emmett Jones. He has a respect and, like I said, a reverence just for Oklahoma. So I think that's exciting. That's going to help him on the recruiting trail. And that's the number one thing frankly, what his impact is the recruiting side of it. His ties to the Dallas and Texas and as a whole is really, really impressive. And he's got a lot of connections. And Oklahoma, you're seeing it already. They're going to cash in big time in the state of Texas at the receiver position because of Emmett Jones. And they're off to a great start, and that's going to continue to happen. He's going to be big time in that regard. So the on-field product is going to be great, but the bringing guys in on the recruiting trail, he's going to crush it. He already is, but that's where it's the most notable part of him. And he's off to a great start, like we said. So a lot to be excited about there with him.
Yeah, you don't grow up in the DFW area and start keeping up with high school football and not know about Emmett Jones. I mean, this guy, I thought it was a great hire. And either way, I know there was a lot of talk at first that Oklahoma wanted Coach Samples, who now finds his way to Arizona State. And whenever that move happened, I was curious to see, okay, well, if it's not going to be Samples, who's it going to be? And then when it popped that it was Emmett Jones, I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So you guys got your guy, no doubt about it. Yeah. Before we move on, I wanted to shout out SBC Bates. Thank you for the 5. He says, I wanted to shout out Kingston Oliver. The update he just gave of him trying to walk on at OU is inspiring. I hope the coaches see his dedication. Man, SBC, that's what really this is all about. It's about people pushing to better themselves and to better a collective. And that's why this is all intriguing to me. It's the storylines. And I think you make a great point here that Kingston Oliver is just one of those storylines that make this so much fun. So in year 2, right, we've talked about recruiting. We've talked about post-spring. What do you think the biggest changes are for Oklahoma going into year 2 with Brent Venables?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but defensive speed and depth, I think, are the biggest, most obvious things that are going to be much, much better. But I'm also curious, too, just seeing how Brent handles everything in year 2. He did a pretty good job, I think, handling the outside the lines part of the job last year's being the head coach for the first time in his life. But I think any OU fan would tell you the game management part of it kind of things got sped up on him a little bit at times last year. Even just simple things, clock management, having a feel for fourth down spots and just kind of using timeouts, just the things like that. Things you don't really think about that much. At times last year, you could tell he was a first-year head coach. He looked like it at times last year. So I think that's going to be a lot better. But they've done a really good job at just upgrading the talent, especially defensively. There's not a hole on the defense right now. There's just not. They've done a really good job. The linebacker spot and the secondary is loaded, but that defensive line is in a really good place too. Defensive edge, especially, has come a long way. Now, you could, if you wanted to poke a hole anywhere, it'd be the D tackle spot, but that's where Todd Bates is, which is like their most accomplished position coach that they have. So I don't have it in me to be too concerned there. They have talent there, so it's not even that the issue. But if you're going to say one, that would be the biggest question. But there's a lot of reasons to feel good about it. So just overall, I think Oklahoma. And, the schedule is pretty favorable. There's a lot of reasons to think that this team is going to see a pretty significant uptick in year 2. I think that if they won anything short of 9 or 10 wins, I think would be pretty disappointing in year 2. And if things break right, it could be more than that. We'll have to wait and see. Last year, it's important to note too, and your record is your record. You don't want to do the whole excuse thing and spin zone thing. That gets hairy. But the reality is last year, they were horrible in one-score games. Winless, actually, in one-score games, as a matter of fact. 0-5 in one-score games. 4 of those losses by a field goal. You can't help but feel like if the depth was a little better and players are a little more fresh and things like that, just buttoning up a few areas, Brent's a little more, comfortable as a second year. Maybe some of those wins are, some of those games are wins. And, if they get even 2 of them and they're 8-4 to end the regular season last year, how much different does things feel than how it ended, So, again, you don't want to do the spin zone thing too much, but 5 losses by 1 score. Gabriel was hurt in the other 2. Things could have been a lot better last year quite easily. I don't think it was quite as bad as it felt. It was bad. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't as bad as I think it maybe looked like on paper when you look back at it, see all the losses and everything like that. So we'll see how things look in year 2. Schedule, like I said, is very favorable. They should get off to they should be 3-0 without even breaking a sweat, basically. And then you go from there into Big 12 play with these new Big 12 teams coming in. But I think expectations have to be, they're cautiously optimistic, I think. I think there's a lot of hope that this team can get back to that 9-10 win range or maybe even more if things go even better than they're hoping.
Well, the schedule certainly works out in favor for Oklahoma. They had Georgia on the schedule, but the SEC canceled
Yeah.
that. I've had Oklahoma fans say it was Georgia. I've had Georgia fans try and say no, it was Oklahoma, guys. That was Sankey. That was
The
that was
SEC, they couldn't return the favor. That's the
Yep.
issue. Yeah.
It was neither of those two programs. I guarantee you, if you mic'd up Kirby or Brent Venables, they'd run through a brick wall to line up against the other. Like that's just the type of coaches they are. I
Yeah.
promise you that would be a lot of fun. But when I look at this, one of the things you talked about is what stands out to me in terms of biggest changes in year two, and that's depth. When I look across the board at Oklahoma this year in several different positions, I think there are depth. Now, I do agree with you. Defensively, if you had to ask me my biggest question for the Oklahoma defense, it's one that I've remained consistent in for a little bit now, and that's interior of the defensive line.
Yeah.
And I think that's just very natural whenever you really start doing deep dives into what Clemson's defense was, what Todd Bates did. You start to understand, oh, this is something that it's going to take a little just a self-sustaining environment almost.
Mm.
And I think that's one area that it's going to be fun to see. But then you can't deny one, like you said, who Todd Bates is, and then the work they did in the transfer portal to immediately answer some of those needs. I know Oklahoma fans are super fired up about the depth in the secondary. You wouldn't believe how many comments I start having with people, and they are just saying, Ty, that secondary, I'm as pumped up to see this secondary as I've been in a long time.
Yeah.
I think you have guys like Peyton Bowen balling out, giving you an idea as to what the future could be. But then you have like a Billy Bowman. It's very easy to get excited. Then I look
100%.
on offense, and one area we don't talk about that could be a question, and I think, well, you might not agree with me. It's going to be interesting. I don't talk about it as much because of who the position coach is, and that's the Oklahoma offensive line. Yes, they lose some
Mm.
pieces, but I just kind of go back to Bill Bedenbaugh's track record, and I'm like, yeah, he's gonna figure it out. Like that's just what he
Yeah.
does. What are you thinking about that?
Yeah, no, it's there's some questions there as well. Offensive line. I mean, you're replacing 3 starters on the offensive line. So I mean, right there, 2 of the guys, you're both your tackles. Anton Harrison was a first-round draft pick, and Wanya Morris went a little later in the draft. But they did a good job in the transfer portal here again. Walter Rouse comes from Stanford. He's going to start at one of the tackle spots. That's a lock. And then the other one's going to be Tyler Guyton, who did a pretty good job last year when Wanya Morris missed some time. He did a pretty good job filling in. He used to be at TCU, came over. He's a really good option as well. He seems the guy to be ready and be a possible another one of these Bedenbaugh draft picks. I don't think anybody would be that surprised if that's how things went. They added Troy Everett from Appalachian State, who I think is maybe going to push Andrew Rame at that center spot, because Andrew Rame has been the center, but I don't know if they're totally convinced that he's still the guy going to 2023 now. So they brought in Troy Everett, who can play center. Certainly, I think he is a realistic option there. McKay Matoyer is back. And then you have a few other options at that other guard spot. So offensive line, I think it's fair to kind of just what's the 5 going to be? How's it going to fit together? But I do think they've done a pretty good job with a couple nice transfer ads. And I think Walter Rouse is going to be a lot of fun to watch there. So offensive line is, there's some questions there, but I think the bigger on the offense as a whole, receiver and frankly the tight end room is a little more, I don't know if concerning is the right word, but I'm a little more interested in seeing what they look like, how they piece that together there. Because tight ends, it's a very hodgepodge group currently. Austin Stogner is back, transferred out and came back. But then after that, it's guys who have hardly played any college football at all. I mean, it's Caden Helms and Jason Llewellyn, both true freshmen last year. And then guys they brought in. I mean, it's a very kind of, like I said, kind of pieced together team and group there. So hopefully Austin Stogner stays healthy, because if not, they're going to have some questions there. But yeah, Bill Bedenbaugh he's one of those guys that you just got to trust. Like you said, you just got to trust him to do his thing.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think whenever I look at this, Bill Bedenbaugh, you look at what he's done in the NFL, and it's just so hard to sit there and be like, oh, I'm concerned because they lost this guy. And then you just have an Oklahoma fan tell you, oh, well, the last time they lost this guy, this is what he did. It's like, oh, well, yeah, that's a really good point, isn't it? This is a dude who develops through and through.
And their offensive line recruiting is really starting to go through the roof as well. They're chasing some other big names here. And I mean, how could you not? I mean, just from like you said, just the number of guys he's put in the NFL, it's that's all the recruiting you need, frankly, a lot of
Yeah.
the time. So yeah, they've done a really good job in that area.
And the other name you talked about that I think, if you asked me who the biggest addition out the transfer portal is for Oklahoma, I'd give you one defense, one offense, just because I think that's fair. It's hard for me to
Sure.
just to really pick between McCullough or Stogner, right? Because McCullough is going to be electric on that defense, but Stogner, and one, I'm going to be honest, man, I've been very biased with the tight end position. I'm a big proponent of heavy tight end
Sure.
usage in college football. I think Austin Stogner is a great addition for the Oklahoma
Needed
Sooners.
him, really needed him, because like I just said, that spot is really thin, and he has the familiarity there. Obviously, haven't been in Oklahoma before. He talking to him, he kind of got the sense that it kind of hurt him to leave. He didn't really want to. He just kind of felt like he needed to. And the whole year at South Carolina, he was enjoying his time there, but he was kind of one eye on Norman, and he was very thankful that they gave him the opportunity to come back. So that's a big one. They need to keep him healthy, though. That's going to be
Yeah.
the question there for sure. And
And then what a storyline
yeah.
as
Yeah.
well. I mean, just the
Right.
story of Austin Stogner, of perseverance, of dedication, of work. It's what
Right.
college football is about, right? I love the story of Stogner. I love how it came full circle. Now, ending this, because I told you we'd go an hour. I mean, you've been so gracious to give us this long. I don't want to take up your whole evening. We started talking about the style of the Venables recruiting method and how
Mm,
it was one that could be a slow burn, but once that fire started going, it's tough to put it out now. It feels like there's a lot of pressure in Norman. We talked about this in the green room, and I don't mean pressure in a bad way. I mean pressure as
yeah.
in things are about to pop. We talk about the tight end position. There's a guy, and you said it earlier, that they're already looking good in 2025. There's a 5-star tight end in 2025. They're hot on the trail for. And
Mhm.
Seth even
Yeah.
puts it here saying defensive tackle and wide receiver are my biggest question marks. Well, Seth, I've got some good news for you, my friend. If those are your biggest question marks, if you were to tell me those are your biggest needs in recruiting, Oklahoma is laying the foundation with some
Yeah.
of the best. Can you talk to us about the state of 2024 recruiting? I know there's a big event coming up, so anything you could give us in
Yeah.
terms of that, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. No, I mean, yeah, 2024, I think it's really going to ramp up here very, very soon. We talked about it a little bit earlier. It was right around that middle of the summer when things really got going for the 23 group. I expect similar for 24. Champion Barbecue is in the summer, and it's a massive recruiting, weekend where tons of players come. Oklahoma always cashes in big time out of that, and already a lot of big names are signed on to be there. And the big ones are you already know the big ones. Obviously, David Stone, they're chasing, 5-star who used to be in the state of Oklahoma, he plays high school ball in Florida now, but they're hot on his trail. And obviously on the offensive side, Bryant Wesco is a 5-star wide receiver that is being chased. To answer that question earlier, the D tackles and receivers, um, they're hot on the trail of many notable names. I see Caden Durham, the running back as well. So I expect much like last summer, right around the middle 4th of July ish range into the middle of July, for the recruits to start really, jumping in, and that 24 group to start really starting to climb. It's starting to see that a little bit the last month or so, with them making some nice additions here. Talked about Emmett Jones being on a heater, with Zion Kearney, and then Brandon Hall and Jaden Hardy. Like they've done this nice job at starting to get some names and faces in there to get the momentum started. And now it's time to really explode in the summer. So I think that's on the way. You get these summer enrollees in as well. We kind of referred to a couple of the receivers. I think it's going to see the momentum into fall camp for the current team as well, which I think is always a really fun thing to see. I do want to make sure, I meant to bring him up earlier and I forgot. But I love Lewis Carter, linebacker from Tampa,
Yes.
Florida. He's a summer enrollee coming to the team. Brent Venables loves him as well. He has the most fun tape of any high school player I've ever watched. His huddle is just him destroying people, basically, just knocking dudes out everywhere. He is a ton of fun to watch. I don't think he's necessarily, as a mid-year enrollee true freshman, going to come in and get a bunch of snaps as a linebacker, but he's a freak in nature, so I wouldn't put it past him either. So just a lot of momentum with the program right now, which I think was kind of unsure. After last year was so disappointing, and they did a good job to lock in that 23 class. But would it be harder to get the fan buy-in, to get the recruiting revved back up for 24? And so far, no, they haven't really missed a beat there. So I think that speaks to what this class is doing and how they're getting these kids and these players to believe in the direction it's headed. So a lot to be excited about here over the course of the summer for Oklahoma.
Absolutely. And Seth asks, and I'm going to modify the question a little bit, Seth, because I'm going to go off of your next comment and ask the question I think you really want to ask. He specifically says, how many D linemen sign with Oklahoma? But he follows it up with saying, I honestly believe we can get Stone, Sims, Smith, and Williams. So fair or unfair? And I think we can say above a 50% chance is fair, below a 50% chance unfair. Oklahoma signs more than 2 5-star defensive linemen this cycle. Fair or unfair?
Oh boy, put me on the spot. More than two? I would. I mean,
Two or more.
Yeah, as an absolute hedge, I would say they probably have a pretty good shot to get two, and so I would say about 70% that they get two. Maybe that's a little too high. I don't know. I think they're in a really good spot with David Stone. I think he's a Sooner. I mean, I would lean on Colin Kennedy, and that's why you should subscribe to 24/7 and get to hear see all his notes and everything like that. But I think they're in a very good spot for him. So then I would just be banking on they're going to get one of the other three. And I think, obviously they have the leg up on Zadavian Sims being in state. So you got to think you got to hope they're in a good shape there. So I think that there's a pretty good chance that they get two of these guys. We'll see how it shakes out. But now what two? Like I said, I feel pretty good about Stone. Other three, if they could get all four, I'm sure they would. But I think they have a decent chance to get two.
If they put all four through, we're going to be talking about this rivaling those A&M classes where you just look and it's like another defensive line.
And A&M's kind of been their scourge, with Gabriel Brownlow, Dindy, and of course David Hicks. They've kind of been the one blocking them from getting these guys. Don't think that's going to happen this time. Knock on wood.
Knock on wood. And I'm no insider, but just from reading tea leaves and from the outside looking in, things to me with David Stone seem to be pointing in Oklahoma's direction. Granted, I haven't spoken to him, but just from the outside looking in, whenever Georgia or Michigan State, their defensive line coach moved from Michigan State to Georgia Tech, that's when I was like, okay, that's probably GG's on that one. Like, I don't think they're going to be able to say, hey, we're rebuilding, come join us. And oh, by the way, the defensive line coach that we have that's so good, he's no longer here anymore. But over there is Todd Bates. Don't go with that. Didn't seem like a winning pitch. But it's interesting how they've positioned themselves for these defensive linemen, and that's the biggest position of need. Travis Davidson in the chat. Guys, if you're an Oklahoma fan, I guarantee you know who Travis is. He hosts the Spaces talking about Oklahoma recruiting. Awesome guy to follow on Twitter, friend of the show. He's been on before. I've been on his show. But it's going to be a lot of fun for Oklahoma. Now, as we wind this down, I wanted to give you an opportunity to just anything that we didn't get to address that you think the fans need to hear, want to hear, or what really fires you up heading into this season.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a lot to be excited about. I mean, Oklahoma this year coming into 2023, and I'm biased because I'm around the team all the time, but I feel like they are one of the most interesting teams in the country and biggest questions, biggest enigmas, wild card, whatever you want to call it, because I don't think nationally people really know what to make of Oklahoma right now. And depending on where you look, some places think that they're not even a top 25 team. Some places think they're a big sleeper to maybe win the Big 12. And I think that's what makes it fun. Oklahoma is a team that the season could go in a lot of different directions next year. But I think that on paper, the talent has been massively upgraded, from last year's group. I mean, they didn't have any defensive players drafted in the NFL draft. Part of that was the defense was not any good last year. But the other part of it is that the best defensive players on last year's team are all back. Billy Bowman is back. Danny Stutzman is back. Ethan Downs is back. All these guys are back on the defense. And then you pair that with everything they've added, like I've mentioned, Deshaun McCullough, Rondell Bothroyd, Trace Ford, Reggie Pearson, Peyton Bowen, the freshman, PJ Adebore, which somehow I'd never mentioned today. He's not normal. He's an absolute freak in nature. The defensive side of the football is, who knows, but it just seems impossible that it's not going to be a lot better in year two. And frankly, if the defense was even just solid last year, they probably win 2 or 3 more games because the offense didn't take that far of a step back as people make it out to be under Dylan Gabriel and Jeff Lebby. It wasn't. People try to act like the offense was just like terrible last year. Statistically, it was actually quite good. So
top 30 offense.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So I think there's a lot of reasons to be excited. And like I said, I think nationally, Oklahoma is a bit of an enigma. I don't think many people know what to make of them right now. So I think that's exciting, and there's a lot to be excited about, I think, with that team going into next year.
Yeah, I love that last point you ended on, that because there's some questions that makes it exciting. As you can see behind me, I have the Roll Tide sign up, and there's a lot of
Yeah,
questions for Alabama, and I am so excited to see what the Tide do this next year because of those questions, right? Like, it creates storylines, it creates theory crafting, and that's when we start
who's the
having,
quarterback
especially,
out there?
goodness gracious, who knows? Who knows? I don't know if you saw, there was like a Vegas odds thing talking about, I think it was Heisman, but they listed some of the Bama quarterbacks on there as like long shots, and they had Ty Simpson as most likely, if you read into it, to win the
Sure,
job.
sure,
He's very talented. He's very talented. I don't know whether he broke or dislocated his thumb during the spring game, but like drive number one messed up his thumb, continued
right,
playing. And it's funny. This is what whenever they got in Buckner from Notre Dame, I can show you plays where it makes complete sense. The dude will do something that's just unreal. But the problem is it gets more into the status quo for Alabama, where I can do the same with Ty Simpson. I can do the same with Jalen Milrow. I can show you
yeah,
plays that they were unbelievable, but it wasn't there consistently. And that's what was a little bit puzzling about the Buckner transfer. And I know Tommy
right,
Reese is there, but
right.
you know, Travis says, "By Job has a better chance of finishing his career at OU than either Stone or
He
Sims
could,
have of finishing theirs at MSU."
he could.
Um,
And he played
but
his
just
high school ball at. Now he's not really a Norman native. He moved to Norman, obviously, later in his life, but he played high school football in Norman. Obviously, community
yeah,
Christian. It's a tiny school in Norman, so not impossible. Not
not
impossible. If he
impossible at
ever does
all.
hit the portal, then yeah, OU probably a big, heavy favorite there, or at least a
I can
contender.
imagine. I can imagine. And like you said the name at the end that I'm really excited for, Adebayor. I mean, the length he has,
Not
the
normal.
speed,
Yeah,
it's
not
not
normal.
normal. It's going to be hard to keep him off the field in terms of at least packages, right? I can imagine they'll be
Yeah.
pushing for him
That
on the field.
defensive, the safety room is, I think, probably the most loaded room on the team. But Miguel Chavis and the defensive ends, they've really done a really, really good job there. Because I mean, Ethan Downs had a good year last year. Reggie Grimes had a disappointing year. R. Mason Thomas is a true freshman, did some nice things. Marcus Stripling kind of was in and out a little bit. But then they went and all those guys are back, and then they went and add Ford and Bothroyd and Adebore. They moved Jonah Laulu over, who did some nice things. They moved him inside because the edges are loaded right now, quite frankly. I think it's not impossible that happens for maybe one other guy too, that they move inside for what we were saying. I mean, defensive tackles is a little more thin, or at least a little more questions, whereas the edges is loaded up. So, yeah, but PJ is he's just not. Yeah, he's like I
Not
said,
normal.
freak in nature. All those things are accurate. His length is just outrageous. So he's definitely got first round NFL pick, type of potential for sure.
And one of the things people were talking earlier about Nwaneri in the 2024 class, I've said
Yeah,
this. One of the things that stands out to me about he in connection to Oklahoma, he seems to be one of those guys where you get him in the room. Where do you want to put him? Do you want to put him outside? He can do it. Do
right.
you want to bulk him up, put him inside? He's game. That's what makes him such an interesting defensive line prospect, is the versatility I think he possesses, which is just going to be uncanny. R. Jacob, a Texas fan in the chat, says he won't run past Kelvin Banks. Hey, man, that's going to be an awesome matchup. Banks was sensational. We talked about this. 4 edges drafted in the first round.
Yeah,
None of them got a sack on Kelvin Banks. I mean, the guy was
right.
great.
No,
That's going to be great, great fun for us to watch. Josh, thank you so much for being on. Before I get you off, and I'm
yeah,
sorry in advance because I've asked you twice before, but third time's the charm. Let us know where everybody can find all
sure.
of your great work and the Oklahoma YouTube page that's coming along for the new guys at 24/7 Sports. Let everybody know where they can find that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can follow me on Twitter at Josh M. Callaway. That'll be, you won't miss anything there, obviously. But then Oklahoma.247sports.com. That's our website. Obviously, you can pay for a subscription. It's really discounted right now. Obviously, new groups, so we're offering some great deals and stuff right now. So check that out. Get all the intel, especially from myself and our other 2 guys. Colin Kennedy, like we said, does an amazing job on the recruiting side. So you can check us out there. And then the YouTube channel, Oklahoma Sooners on 24/7 Sports, is the name of the YouTube channel. There's just a few things in there, a few videos that we've made to, just kind of talking about some things. they're getting that revved up. That's where our podcast is going to be, and we're going to have lots of videos and stuff flowing on there. That channel is also going to be where we put all the press conferences and player interviews and stuff like that as well. So if you're an OU fan, that channel it would behoove you to subscribe to that channel and keep up with it, because there's going to be lots of good stuff there all throughout, obviously, the summer, but especially once the season gets going as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be sure to link that once ever we get out of here. I'll put that down in the comments. And guys, like we Josh and I were talking about in the green room, I'd like to get him back with Colin, with the whole team, and we'll do like a little round table event and talk some more about Oklahoma. But Josh, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It was a great time getting to talk with you about this. I think everybody enjoyed it. Kim says good luck on your new gig. Travis was very excited for you getting picked up by 24/7 Sports. So it's going to be a lot of fun, guys. If you're an Oklahoma fan, there is a ton of phenomenal content coming your way, and we're going to be here to cover it all, and we'll have Josh back on the channel. Josh, and since your first time here, there's a thing we do every time we end the broadcast. There's a spinning wheel of doom, and everybody gets really accustomed to the spinning wheel of doom, because right